At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. I mean, in the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name is the Voice Ogre, and let's begin. The laughter was the worst part. A thin, cruel thing, sharp and metallic, like sucking on a spent power cell. It crackled with a useless, static energy, offering Ayala nothing but a bitter aftertaste and the sharp, physical pang of her own gnawing emptiness. It lacked the rich, hearty flavor of genuine mirth that could sustain a soul. She sat in the polished, sterile food court of Ethelberg Station, a ghost at a feast where no one was truly eating. The station was a monument to profitable tranquility, a hub where the Off-World Acquisition Syndicate had recently rolled out its latest pilot program, the Emotional Decorum Accords. Public displays of strong feeling were not just discouraged, they were monitored, cataloged, and fined. The air, therefore, hummed with the psychic equivalent of white noise, a bland, tasteless static of transactional thoughts, of profit margins and docking schedules, of polite, curated indifference. The entire station was an emotional desert by design, and she was dying of thirst. Her body, which should have held a soft, internal luminescence, was terrifyingly gaunt. Her skull a dull, matte gray that swallowed the harsh overhead light. She had folded herself into the smallest possible shape in the hard plastic chair, a futile attempt to conserve the last dregs of her life force. Across the concourse, a table of off-duty cargo haulers had noticed her. Their thoughts were loud, unshielded, and ugly. A minor rebellion against the station's placid new rules.
Look at that one, a soul drinker. Bet she's got the space plague.
Their mockery was a series of tiny, irritating pinpricks, their shallow cruelty providing no more sustenance than dust. They laughed, pointing, their amusement a sour, curdled thing. They laughed while the alien girl starved. Then one human said,
"Come eat with me."
The voice cut through the sterile hum like a solar flare. It belonged to a man balancing a tray piled high with a precarious, garish mountain of food. Slick synth sausages, neon green relish, and something that looked suspiciously like fried fungus on a stick. He moved with a loose-limbed confidence that was a flagrant violation of the station's unspoken code of conduct. He stopped at her table, his presence a sudden, shocking nova of feeling in the placid quiet.
"Tough crowd,"
he said to her, a wry twist to his lips. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned to the laughing cargo handlers, his smile widening into something less friendly, an expression that probably registered on a dozen nearby decorum sensors.
"Sorry, fellas. I think you have the wrong table. This one's reserved."
The men grumbled, their bravado deflating under his easy authority. A low-level OAS patrol drone shifted silently by, its optical sensor glowing a placid blue, but it seemed to assess the interaction as a de-escalation and moved on. The men shuffled away, casting resentful glances over their shoulders. The man turned back to Ayala, his expression softening. He slid his tray onto the table with a clatter, the greasy, colorful food an affront to the station's pristine aesthetic. He sat down opposite her, leaned forward on his elbows, and gave her a charming, protective grin that made the airless space in her chest suddenly feel pressurized. "Hey," he repeated, his voice softer now. "Come eat with me." A torrent of emotions washed over her. Not a trickle, but a tidal wave. There was the sharp, metallic scent of protective indignation on her behalf. A feeling so potent it almost had a sound, like cracking ice. Beneath it, a broad, warm current of genuine curiosity flowed, a mellow heat that soothed the raw edges of her hunger. And under that, a bright, sparking fizz of raw, unapologetic attraction. It was a complex, chaotic, and utterly delicious symphony of sensation. It was the first real meal she'd tasted in weeks. A jolt so powerful it made her head swim with dizzy, overwhelming relief. Her vision, which had been graying at the edges, snapped back into sharp, vibrant color. The man, this human, was a walking, talking, all-you-can-eat buffet. He was still grinning at her, and she realized she was staring, her mouth slightly agape. He chuckled, misinterpreting her dazed shock for shyness.
Don't worry, I don't bite. Unless you're into that. In which case, we can negotiate terms later.
He winked, a gesture so brazenly flirtatious it sent another delightful ripple of amused confidence through the air.
The name's Rory Cutcherson, Captain, Owner, and Chief Battle Washer of the freighter Stray Comet. And you are?
Ayala, she managed, her voice a dry whisper. The sound of her own name felt foreign, a word from a life she'd lived long ago.
Ayala,
he repeated, tasting the word.
That's a pretty name. Doesn't sound like it's from around here.
He gestured vaguely at the sterile, white-paneled walls of the concourse.
Then again, nobody's really from here. This place is the Galaxies waiting room, now with extra waiting and less room.
He launched into a rambling, charismatic monologue, stabbing a piece of fried fungus with a plastic fork.
You would not believe the day that I'm having. First, the docking clamps are magnetized for Cartian holes, not standard rigs, so my girl is grinding her teeth the whole time, right? And then the Port Authority tries to bill me for unauthorized atmospheric venting because the coffee maker exploded again. The Comet's galley now smells faintly of burnt ambition and cheap Aldebaran beans. But the real cherry on top of this garbage sundae is this one customs official, Husk.
As he spoke, Ayala felt the rich textures of his feelings. His frustration with the docking clamps was a low, grumbling heat, like coals in a forge. His exasperation with the coffee maker was a bubbly, self-deprecating froth that tasted of superheated plastic and dark humor. But his annoyance at Hask, that was the main course. It was a sharp, righteous indignation, seasoned with a healthy dose of pure, unadulterated amusement at the absurdity of it all. It was a 5-star meal, and with every word he spoke, she felt life seeping back into her. The faint, pearlescent glow began to return to her skin, making the harsh station lighting seem softer. "What's a husk?" she asked, her voice gaining a little of its natural melodic timbre.
A killjoy, a Vogue, built like a filing cabinet and has the personality to match. He's trying to slap me with this massive fine for the coffee maker, but I know that it's really because I laughed when he was giving me the safety briefing on the new emotional decorum rules. Laughed. Apparently my unwarranted joviality was disruptive to the station's mandated serenity. Can you believe that? A fine for a busted coffee pot, enforced by a man who is personally offended by happiness. This station is a joke. Very expensive, very boring joke.
He leaned in, a conspiratorial glint in his eyes.
You know, I told him his face looked like it was designed by a committee that hated faces.
Shh. The joke was terrible, objectively, galactically, fundamentally awful. But the sheer, shameless delight he took in it was so potent, so pure that a breathy, involuntary sigh of pleasure escaped her lips. The feeling was a bright, clean spark, and it felt like the first sip of water after an eternity of thirst. Rorik paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at her, really looked at her, and noticed the change, the slight flush in her cheeks. The way her eyes, which had been dull and listless, now held a luminous depth.
Whoa, okay, you really like that one, huh? Or are you just having a reaction to the airborne grease particles?
She had to tell him something. The truth was too complex, too dangerous. But a version of it might be her only way out of this sterile hell.
I metabolize emotion, Rorik Hutchison.
He blinked.
You do what now?
Strong feelings. Potent ones.
She explained, gesturing weakly.
They are sustenance to me. This place.
She looked around the concourse, at the placid, emotionless faces of people trying to avoid a fine.
This place is a famine by law.
Rorik's expression shifted from confusion to a dawning comprehension, then to something that looked suspiciously like delighted wonder. He put his fork down and leaned forward again, his voice dropping to a low, excited whisper.
You're telling me that you are a feeling eater? Like my existential rage at galactic bureaucracy is literally your lunch?
In a manner of speaking, yes.
He stared at her for a long moment, a slow grin spreading across his face. It was the grin of a man who had just been handed the most interesting toy in the universe.
Okay,
he said, a new energy crackling around him.
Okay, I think I have an idea. A deal.
She tilted her head.
A deal?
Yeah. The customs goon, Ask. He's waiting for me to come back and pay that ridiculous fine. He gets off on it. That petty power trip, that bureaucratic dominance. It's probably the only joy the poor bastard ever feels.
He tapped his fingers on the table, a rhythm of staccato, of sudden, brilliant inspiration.
So here's the pitch. You come with me, and if you can,
He wiggled his fingers in a gesture she assumed was meant to signify psychic strangeness.
If you can weird him out enough that he drops the fine, I'll be really happy about it for a whole hour. A full 60 minutes of pure, unadulterated, fine-dodging glee. Plus, I'll give you a ride off with this glorified paperweight of a station. What do you say?
The offer was absurd. It was reckless. It was also the best thing she had heard in an age. The prospect of an entire hour of his focused, triumphant joy was like being offered an oasis in the heat of a desert.
I accept your terms,
she said, and for the first time in a very long time, Ayala smiled. The customs checkpoint was a sterile box of gray metal and humming scanners, presided over by Hask. He peered at Rorik over the top of a datapad, his expression one of deep, well-worn disapproval.
Hutchison,
he droned, his voice a monotonous buzz.
Payment for citation 1 Delta 4 unauthorized atmospheric venting is now due. Your vessel's equipment malfunction has been logged and assessed.
Come on, Ask,
Rorik said, leaning against the counter. He was projecting an aura of casual defiance, but underneath it, Ayala could sense a sharp, anxious tremor. The fine was clearly more than he was letting on.
It was a coffee maker, not a reactor core. Can we just call it a warning? I promise to only drink cold beverages for the rest of my stay.
Regulations are absolute,
Hask stated, his satisfaction a dull, greasy sensation that Ayala found deeply unappetizing.
Pay the fine or your vessel will be clamped.
This was her cue. Ayala stepped forward, moving with a grace that felt new and wonderful after weeks of enervation. She placed a hand lightly on Rorik's forearm. The moment she made contact, the world shifted. It was like putting on a high-gain amplifier on an already powerful signal. The diffuse cloud of his emotions, his anxiety, his bravado, his underlying hope that this ridiculous plan might work, focused into a potent, intoxicating current that flowed directly into her. It was dizzying. Strength, warm and vibrant, flooded her limbs. She looked at Hask. It was still droning on about subsection this and procedural that. She didn't try to feed on him. There was nothing there worth tasting. Instead, she did something she hadn't had the strength to attempt in years. She took a tiny, specific sliver of Rorik's anxiety, the cold dread of having his ship impounded, and gently pushed it. Not at Rorik, but at the chinless official. Hask faltered mid-sentence, his eyes unfocused for a fraction of a second. A wave of nameless, formless dread washed over him. Had he left the primary security grid unlocked? Was that a critical alert flashing on a secondary monitor, or just a reflection? Did his supervisor know he'd used his official account to bid on antique paperweights last night? The sudden, inexplicable paranoia was jarring. He fumbled his datapad, his fingers suddenly clumsy.
Just...
He looked from Rorik to Ayala, his gaze lingering on her for a moment with the flicker of unease. Her otherworldly calm now seemed deeply unsettling. He just wanted them gone. The paperwork for an impound was extensive, and he suddenly had a terrible feeling about his quarterly review.
Go,
he grunted, waving a dismissive hand.
get out of here, and then get that coffee machine properly serviced.
He turned away, busying himself with recalibrating a scanner that was already perfectly calibrated. Rorik stood frozen for a second, then a slow, incredulous grin spread across his face. He looked at Ayala, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and profound admiration. He didn't say a word until they were clear of the checkpoint and walking down to the docking corridor toward the berth of the stray common.
Okay,
he finally breathed out, the word bursting with suppressed laughter.
That was incredible. You didn't even say anything. You sort of just melted.
The triumphant joy she had been promised began to radiate from him. A brilliant, golden white feeling like sun-warmed honey and sparkling wine. It was glorious. She felt it knitting her back together, cell by cell.
The deal is real,
he said, his voice full of genuine wonder. He looked at her, at the way the light was catching the new luminescence of her skin.
You're traveling with me. The stray comet is your new home, Ayala. At least for a while.
He gestured down the corridor to a ship that looked less like a commercial freighter and more like a collection of parts flying in loose formation. The captain's chair in the cockpit was worn leather, patched in 3 different places with synth tape, and she could already smell the faint, lingering scent of burnt coffee. It smelled like freedom. For the first time, she sensed a new emotion from him, something deeper, quieter than the chaotic surface feelings. It was a thread of protectiveness, of responsibility. It felt warm and steady and deeply, deeply nourishing. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that her famine was over. Their first real journey together was born of necessity. Rorik's band of chaotic good didn't always translate to a healthy credit balance, and the close call on Aethelberg Station had left his accounts dangerously thin.
All right, Dale,
he said, leaning back in his worn captain's chair, feet propped up on a console held together by a surprising amount of metallic tape.
Good news and bad news. The bad news is that we are currently running on fumes and the goodwill of a space vendor in the Caldera Nebula who I may or may not owe money to from 2 years ago. Well, the good news, I have found this a job.
He spun a datapad around for her to see. The job was a priority freight run. Transport a crate of hyper-refined Tabanian gas from a private refinery to a luxury orbital spa. The pay was excellent. The catch was a refinery's proprietor.
A classy merchant named Jarok,
Rorik explained, his voice taking on a grim tone.
They're notorious, slippery as a grease steel in a gravity well. They'll try to negotiate at every turn, read the fine print with a microscope, and probably try to charge us for the oxygen that we breathe in his office.
You sound apprehensive,
Ayala noted. The emotion coming off him was a complex blend. The sharp prickle of anxiety, but also the low thrum of excitement. A challenge.
Apprehensive is my middle name,
Rorik quipped.
Rorik Apprehensive Hutcherson. It's a family name, but the pay is too good to pass up. We just need to be smart. And this,
he said, gesturing between the two of them,
is a new variable he won't be expecting.
Jarok's office was as slick and oily as the merchant himself. The air was thick with the cloying scent of exotic perfumes, and the furniture was made of a dark, polished wood that seemed to drink the light. Jarok, a tall, slender being with skin that rippled with colors, like a heat haze over polished chrome, regarded them with an expression of deep, unshakable smugness. The feeling radiated from him, a greasy, self-satisfied slick that coated everything in the room. It was unpleasant, but undeniably potent. The negotiation started poorly. Jarok, true to form, immediately began picking apart their contract.
Captain Hutcherson,
he purred, his voice a silken trap.
The contract specifies delivery within 3 rotations, but it does not specify the priority of the offloading queue. For a premium position, there would, of course, be a commensurate adjustment to your fee.
Rorik bristled.
That's not how this works, Jarok. A priority run means priority delivery.
Semantics, my dear Captain. Merely semantics.
Jarok's confidence was a thick, suffocating blanket. Ayala could feel Rorik's own confidence beginning to waver. His frustration a bitter spike that was quickly being overwhelmed by the Colossi's oily certainty. She had to do something. She had been sitting silently, a decorative enigma. But now, she leaned forward slightly. She remembered the customs checkpoint, the way physical contact had focused Rorik's emotional broadcast. Using the pretense of steadying herself on the slick chair, she reached out and rested her hand on Rorik's forearm, just as she had before. The connection snapped into place. Rorik's turbulent emotions flooded her senses. But this time, she felt something new. His presence, his focused intent, acted like a lens. It allowed her to look past the overwhelming noise of his feelings and focus over the room's other occupant with startling clarity. She turned her attention to Jarok. She began to draw on his smugness, pulling it in not as a chaotic flood, but as a thin, steady thread. The greasy flavor was still there, but through the filter of Rorik's presence, it was cleaner, more manageable. As she drew it in, Jarok's smooth patter began to falter. A flicker of doubt crossed his features.
The spa's thermoregulators are quite sensitive,
he stammered, losing his train of thought for a moment.
A delay could be problematic.
Rorik, feeling the sudden shift in the room's power dynamic, seized the opening. His spine straightened.
Exactly. Problematic for you, Jarok. The spa pays you on delivery. A delay means that you're on the hook for their lost revenue. and I hear their clientele is very, very important.
Ayala pressed her advantage, pulling a little harder on the Galaxies' confidence. Jirok's oily skin seemed to lose some of its sheen. He felt a prickle of genuine anxiety. Had he overplayed his hand? This strange, silent woman at Hutcherson's side was unnerving, and the human's confidence had returned with a vengeance.
Fine,
Jirok conceded, his voice losing its silken edge.
Standard fee, as per the original contract. But any damages to the container will be deducted at triple the rate.
Rorik laughed, a genuine, booming laugh this time. A joy that erupted from him was a pure, cleansing fire that scoured the greasy residue of the Galaxies' smugness from Ayala's senses.
Deal,
Rorik said, sealing the contract on his datapad before Jirok could change his mind. Later, back on the stray comet, the crate of Tabanian gas secured in the cargo hold, Rorik was jubilant.
We did it! You are amazing! He folded like a cheap suit.
He was pacing the bridge, radiating a triumphant energy that was the most delicious thing Ayala had tasted all day. She smiled, but a strange sensation lingered. It was a faint echo of his joy, still resonating within her. It was pleasant, but it also seemed to muffle the other, more subtle emotional textures of the universe around them. The quiet hum of the ship, the distant whisper of a passing freighter. They were harder to hear, as if she were listening to the world through a thick pane of glass.
You are my good luck charm, Hale,
Rorik said, stepping in front of her chair, eyes shining.
My secret weapon.
She looked at him, at this vibrant, chaotic man who was becoming the center of her universe. She felt a surge of deep affection for him, a warm, golden feeling that resonated with the echo of his joy already inside her. The thought that this wonderful feeling might also be a cage was a tiny, cold splinter of fear she chose for now to ignore. Back on Aethelberg Station, the universe was conspiring against their quiet bliss. The humiliated customs official Hask, still smarting from his inexplicable bout of professional anxiety, filed a detailed incident report. He detailed Rorik's history of minor infractions and made specific mention of the unregistered off-world female of unknown origin, whose presence coincided with his momentary cognitive lapse. He used the phrase, suspected bio-emotive influence. The report, like billions of others, was fed into the station's central data network. But the phrase bio-emotive influence cross-referenced with unregistered off-worlder was a keyword flag. An algorithm, silent and tireless, shunted the report from the vast sea of bureaucratic noise into a high-priority queue. That queue landed on the desk of Director Merrill Rusk. She sat in her office at the pinnacle of the Off-World Acquisition Syndicate Tower, a space as serene and sterile as her own mind. Morel was one of the Ascended, a species that had generations ago surgically and physically severed their own capacity for strong emotion to end a cycle of devastating civil wars. They had achieved perfect stability, perfect peace, perfect emptiness. Morel saw this not as a loss, but as the ultimate evolutionary triumph. She read Husk's report, her calm features betraying no reaction, but a subtle rhythmic flexing of the tiny articulated plates flanking her jaw indicated intense focus. Bio-emotive influence. She cross-referenced the phrase with the OAS deep archives, pulling up sparse, fragmented data, ancient explorer accounts, garbled myths. The name came up again and again. Symbiont, a critically endangered, perhaps extinct species that metabolized emotional energy. A species spoken of in fearful whispers as romance leeches. On a secondary screen, she pulled up surveillance footage from a recent off-world riot that OAS forces had been suppressing. She watched the chaotic swirl of faces contorted in rage, fear, and grief. She felt nothing, but she analyzed it. Such waste, such wasted energy, such pain. Her life's work, her entire ideology was centered on the belief that emotion was a plague, the chaotic variable that was the root of all suffering in the galaxy. She sought a cure, a way to help lesser species achieve the tranquility of the ascended. It was, in her mind, the ultimate philanthropic act. And a symbiont, a living symbiont, was the key. Her goal was not to kill it, not even to study it. It was something far more elegant. She envisioned a living, organic, emotional dampener. She could capture the creature, surgically integrate into a command and control system, and use its natural biological function to create a field that would literally drain the anger from a riot, the passion from a rebellion, the hope from a resistance. It could bring peace to the galaxy's most troubled systems. It would be her gift to a universe that didn't know how much it was suffering. She keyed in a command. Initiate high-priority trace on freighter registry stray comet. Flag vessel and all associated personnel for live capture acquisition. Priority Alpha. Her voice was calm, clipped and utterly devoid of feeling. The hunt had begun. One rotation later, floating in the quiet space between systems, the bridge of the stray comet lit only by the swirling, majestic colors of a newborn nebula, Ayala felt comfortable enough to share a piece of herself, of her home. In my culture, she began, her voice soft and melodic, we do not tell stories of heroes who conquer. We tell stories of those who connect. We have one, a story for children about the first pair. Rorik, lounging in the captain's chair, turned to listen.
A love story?
A cautionary tale, she corrected gently. It was about two symbionts, long ago, who fell into a particular kind of love, an exclusive, focused love. The story says that their light became so bright that they could only see each other. The rest of the world, the rest of their constellation, their community, faded into shadow. She continued, her eyes distant. They were beautiful. Their shared joy was a constant feast for one another. They wrapped themselves in the light of their mutual affection, a perfect, self-contained circuit. But in their bliss, they forgot how to eat from the world outside. Their perfect love offered no new energy, only recycled what was already there. And so, wrapped in their beautiful light, they began to fade. They starved in each other's arms, and one day, they simply winked out, leaving behind only a beautiful, tragic silence. There is another part of this story, she added, a faint frown touching her lips. A forgotten verse that the elders called a comforting lie. It claimed that their love didn't just vanish, but it transformed, becoming a new kind of energy that could sustain them. But it was always told as a foolish fantasy. The real lesson was clear. To love one person so completely is to build a beautiful prison for two. Rorik was quiet for a long moment.
Wow, he said, his voice soft. That's poetic. Tragic, yeah, but beautiful. A love so strong that it consumes you.
He saw it as a metaphor, a romantic ideal. Ayala, however, told it with a deep ancestral sadness that he couldn't quite parse. It was a sadness of a truth she did not and could not understand. It was the story of the death spiral. The culmination of their intimacy was as inevitable as a supernova. They had just navigated the stray comet through a treacherous, uncharted meteor shower. a frantic, exhilarating dance of thruster burns and last-second trajectory changes. The ship's hull groaned and pinged with minor impacts, but they were through. They were safe. The silence that followed was thick with the residue of their shared experience. Adrenaline, sharp and electric, still sang in their veins. Relief washed over them, a warm, cleansing tide. Rorik cut the main drive, and the ship floated in the sudden, profound quiet of deep space. He turned to look at her. She was bathed in the cool, distant light of a blue giant. Her skin glowing with a soft, pearlescent light, energized by the thrilling emotions of their flight. She was breathtaking, the most vital, most alive being he had ever known. All the witty remarks, all the charming lines, all the sarcastic bravado he used as armor, simply dissolved. There was nothing left but a raw, overwhelming truth. He leaned across the console, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Her skin was warm, vibrant. "Ayala," he breathed. And then he couldn't hold back anymore. He kissed her. For Ayala, it was an explosion. It was not a taste. It was a detonation of the senses. In the chaotic buffet of their shared adventures, she tasted his excitement, his anger, his joy, his curiosity. But this was different. This was from the core. She felt his bone-deep relief at their survival. She felt his awe at her beauty. She felt his fierce, protective desire. And beneath it all, a new sensation, a terrifying and powerful one that she had only ever felt in trace amounts before. It was a deep, resonant, unconditional love. It was the most potent and overwhelming and nourishing meal she had ever had. It surged through her, lighting up every cell in her body until she felt she was made of pure light. She was incandescent. He was completely, irrevocably in love. And in that moment, that beautiful moment, they were both blissfully unaware that they had just lit the fuse on a bomb. The days that followed were bliss. A quiet, domestic, and utterly horrifying bliss. Ayala found herself growing weak again, a familiar, terrifying lethargy seeping into her limbs. The vibrant glow of her skin began to dim, the edges fraying like a dying ember. It didn't make sense. Rorik was more attentive, more loving than ever. He woke her with a kiss, brought her steaming mugs of coffee, and filled the quiet hours in the ship with stories and laughter. His love was a constant, steady presence, and that was the problem. The chaotic, spiky, unpredictable emotions he used to provide had smoothed out. They were replaced by the steady, warm hum of his affection. It was a beautiful and pure and constant note. As she had feared after the Tibanian gas run, her senses had become so completely attuned to him, so focused on the powerful, refined signal of his love, that all other ambient emotions were muffled into indistinct static. She was trapped in an echo chamber of his affection. It was like trying to live on a diet of nothing but wedding cake. At first, it's transcendent, but soon you're going to be starving for nutrients. The cautionary tale she had told him was not a metaphor. It was a biological warning. The beautiful prison was built. The death spiral had begun. "This is insane," Rorik said, pacing the small galley of the stray comet. "It doesn't make any sense." "It makes perfect sense," Ayala replied, her voice weak. She was huddled in a chair, wrapped in a blanket. The very picture of a woman he'd first met at the Ethelberg station. They'd tried to fix it. They'd docked at a rowdy mining outpost, hoping a crowded cantina would provide a charge, but it was disaster. The ambient emotions of the miners, drunken boasts, petty grievances, desperate lust, were muted, distant. Her senses were so locked onto Rorik's steady, loving presence beside her that the cantina's chaos was like a muffled party happening in the next building. She couldn't tune in. The focus of their bond had become a filter, blocking everything else out. He'd even tried to start a fake argument with her.
Your taste in shoegaze music is objectively terrible,
he declared, trying to sound genuinely incensed, but they both knew it was false. The emotion had no substance, no flavor. It was a hollow performance. Then they discovered something even more horrifying. He'd been feeling it for days, a creeping exhaustion he'd chalked up to long hours at the helm. But it was more than that. He felt drained, less vibrant, as if his own emotional energy was being siphoned away, not to feed her, but simply to sustain the closed circuit between them. The loop wasn't just starving her, it was poisoning them both. It was consuming them from the inside out.
There has to be a way,
Rorik insisted, running a hand through his hair.
We need more chaos, more people. We'll find one of your constellations. They're gone, Rorik,
she whispered, the words tasting of dust.
My people are scattered, hunted. The knowledge was lost. The stories that survived were broken and incomplete, just like the one I told you. There is nowhere to go.
The fight was terrible because it wasn't born of anger, but of fear and love. Rorik, a pragmatist at heart, couldn't accept a problem without data, without a solvable equation.
There is something that we're missing,
he insisted, holding up a data pad as if it could provide an answer.
A biological component, a psychic frequency, something that we can measure and counteract. It is not something that you can measure on a machine, Rorik,
Ayala cried, her frustration giving her a momentary burst of weak energy.
It is a fundamental truth of my existence. I know it in my bones. The story is real. Stories can be wrong.
He shot back, his voice tight with desperation.
People get facts wrong all the time. How could you be so sure? How can you know that forgotten verse wasn't the truth and that the tragedy was a lie? Because I am living it,
she screamed, pushing herself to her feet.
I am starving and you are fading and all we have is this beautiful, perfect, lethal love between us. You have to believe me. I want to,
he yelled, his face a mask of anguish.
Ale, I want to, but you are asking me to accept that loving you is killing you. That is not a fact, that is a nightmare. Love doesn't kill people.
She looked at him, her heart breaking for this wonderful, chaotic human who refused to believe a problem couldn't be punched through or charmed through.
For my kind, it does,
she replies, her voice a shattered whisper.
It is the most beautiful prison in the universe.
The argument raged until they were both emotionally raw, until the very air in the small ship felt thick and heavy with their shared misery. The effort, the sheer emotional output trapped and amplified in their toxic loop, left Rorik utterly spent. He collapsed into his bunk, falling into a deep, unnaturally heavy sleep of pure exhaustion. Ayala watched him sleep, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She loved him. She loved his stupid puns, his reckless bravery, his unwavering belief that things could be fixed. And it was love that was killing him. She would not be the beautiful prison that consumed him. She moved quietly through the ship, her home. She went to the cockpit and recorded a short, desperate message, her image a ghostly figure on the screen.
Rorik,
she began, her voice thick with unshed tears.
I'm sorry. You were right. Love shouldn't kill people. Which is why I have to do this. The fairy tale was a warning, and I was too happy to listen. I love you too much
to watch us both fade away into a pretty tragic story. So please, live. Be chaotic and loud and wonderful. Forget me."
She wiped her tears. She took the stray comet's small, one-person emergency shuttle, a last resort. She didn't know where she was going. Just away. To some sterile, anonymous port where she could fade quietly, alone. She keyed in the activation sequence, the shuttle humming to life. And then the controls froze. The navigation screen, which had been showing a star chart, flickered and went dark. Red lines of code scrolled across it before resolving into the cool corporate logo of the Off-World Acquisition Syndicate. A calm female voice, utterly devoid of emotion, filled the small cabin. "Unregistered symbiont asset acquired," the voice stated. "Your shuttle's navigation has been overridden. Rerouting to Ethelberg Station for surgical integration. Do not be alarmed." A chill, far colder than the one from her starvation, washed over Ayala. She wasn't fleeing to a slow death. She was being dragged back to the abattoir. Rorik woke to a silence that was more profound than the mere absence of sound. It was an emotional void. The constant, warm hum of Ayala's presence, a feeling he'd grown so accustomed to that it was like a second heartbeat, was gone. Panic seized him. He scrambled out of bed and found the cockpit empty. The message icon was blinking on the main console. He played it. Her ghostly image flickered to life, her words tearing through him. The news of her departure stole the air from his lungs. Grief followed, hot and sharp. He was about to slump into the captain's chair in despair when a new alert flashed on the ship's proximity sensor. Emergency shuttle last resort has detached. He lunged for the tracking console, his grief instantly burned away by the surge of furious determination. He brought up the shuttle's transponder signal. He saw its initial trajectory, heading back out into the black, but then watched in horror as the track made an abrupt, uncommanded turn. It was now on a direct, unswerving course back toward Ethelberg Station. "No," he whispered. She wouldn't go back there. It didn't make sense. Unless she wasn't the one flying. His blood ran cold. He hammered at the comms, hailing the shuttle. Ayala, answer me! What's happening?" Only static answered. He realized the terrifying truth. She hadn't just left. She was taken. Merrill Rusk was closing her net. Rorik knew he couldn't fight a corporate syndicate alone, but he didn't have to. He sat down at his comm station and pulled up a heavily encrypted file named Ledger. It was his favor ledger, a meticulously kept list of every being he had ever helped. It was time to make a withdrawal. His right hand flickered 3 physical switches in sequence, while his left traced a glowing blue circuit path across the main screen. First, he called Griggs, the dock worker union chef at Ethelberg Station. "Griggs, Aurora Cutcherson. Remember that plasma conduit I rerouted for you when your kid was sick? Well, I need you to call a strike, a loud one, at 1400 hours station time." "A strike? Hutchison OAS is gonna have my hide." "They're going to kill her, Griggs," Rorik said, his voice raw. "Please." A long silence. Then a gruff, "Damn it, Hutchison. 1400 hours." Next, Finch, the shadowy info broker. "Finch, I delivered that medicine for your clutchmate. No questions asked. I need you to do 2 things. First, get every piece of blackmail and dirt you have on the Ethelberg Station officials and dump it on the public net at 1400 hours. Second, I need you to get me into the Plaza's main view screen broadcast."
The screen is a closed system, Hutcherson, and that data dump will get me hunted for rotations.
Finch hissed. "I know. Name your price."
You'll owe me a run into the Seraphim Drift for this. No questions asked, and I mean no questions.
"Done,"
Rorik said without hesitation. He called others, a dozen others, a mechanic to set off steam valves, a poet to hijack the public audio. One, a cantina owner named Bess, refused. I'm sorry, Rorik. The OAS, they don't make threats. They make examples. I can't. He didn't argue. He just moved to the next name. He was a gambler betting everything on a single chaotic hand. He set the stray comet on an intercept course, pushing its engines far into the red. In Ethelberg Station's main plaza, Meryl Rusk had her prize. The hijacked shuttle had landed under OAS control, and Ayala, weakened and defeated, had been escorted to the center of the grand, sterile expanse. OAS security officers in sleek black armor formed a closing circle, their tranquilizer rifles raised.
Ayala of the Signian Vale,
Morel said, her voice a calm, serene pronouncement. They stood just outside the circle of guards, a picture of placid control.
You are a remarkable creature, a key to a more peaceful galaxy. Please do not resist. This is not an execution. It is an ascension.
Ayala stared at her, at the utter emptiness behind her eyes. This was the end. A cold, sterile end. And then, at precisely 1400 hours, Ethelberg Station erupted. Rorik's Symphony of Chaos began. In the main shipping bay, Griggs Union began a loud, angry chant, their collective rage a sudden, shocking jolt to Ayala's system. Simultaneously, Finch's data dump hit the public net. The plaza's secondary screens lit up with scandalous private messages and illegal financial records of station officials, creating a wave of shock and betrayal that was sharp and intoxicating. From the station's public address system, a voice began to broadcast. Not the usual calm announcements, but the agonized, heartbreaking verses of a truly terrible amateur poet. A wave of second-hand melancholy, poignant and surprisingly nourishing, washed through the air. And then, the largest view screen in the plaza, which had been advertising luxury star yachts, flickered and changed. Finch's hack had worked. Rorik's face, wild-eyed and passionate, filled the screen 100 feet high.
People of Ethelberg Station,
He yelled, his voice echoing across the marble.
I know that you're told to keep it in, to be calm, to be quiet. But for 1 minute I am asking you to feel something. For the woman in the fountain, be angry, be happy, be sad, be confused. Just be human. Feel something, you magnificent bastards. Feel it!
The wave of raw, chaotic emotion was a tsunami. It was a messy, disorganized, dissonant symphony of rage and sorrow, surprise and confusion, and a strange, burgeoning spark of rebellious joy from the onlookers watching the corporate plaza descend into madness. For Ayala, it was the most complex, most overwhelming, most life-giving buffet she could have imagined. Strength, brilliant and powerful, surged through her. Meryl Rusk's serenity finally cracked. The flexing of her jaw plates became a frantic, uncontrolled shudder.
Fire!
She commanded her team.
Subdue the asset!
But Ayala was no longer an asset. She looked at Meryl and opened the floodgates. She gathered up the raw panic of the startled crowd, the burning rage of the protesting dockworkers, the deep sorrow of the terrible poetry, and she force-fed it all to Meryl Rusk. The ascended director, whose people had not felt such primal, chaotic things for centuries, collapsed. She let out a thin, reedy shriek and crumpled to the ground, whimpering, her mind utterly overloaded. Her security team faltered, their rifles lowering as they stared at their neutralized leader. But they were still soldiers. They recovered, turning their aim back to Ayala, their expressions now grim. She was energized, but she was still just one person, surrounded. A shadow fell over the plaza. The stray comet descended, its landing gear screeching as it made a flagrantly illegal landing on the pristine marble. The main ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss, but Rorik didn't just stand there.
Hey, tin cans!
he roared over the ship's external speakers. The ship's heavy-duty cargo loading arms swung out, not with weapons, but with magnetized grapples. They snatched a massive, decorative metal sculpture from near the fountain and swung it like a wrecking ball into a row of OAS patrol speeders, sending them crashing into one another in a shower of sparks. The guard's attention snapped to the ship, the new, immediate threat. In that moment of chaos, Rorik sprinted down the ramp. He ran, a man with a blaster pistol and a reckless heart, weaving through the panicked crowd and the distracted guards. He reached Ayala, grabbed her hand, and pulled her toward the ship. A few stray tranquilizer darts sizzled past them. "Come on!" he yelled, pulling her up the ramp. The doors closed behind them, sealing them in sudden, blessed silence. They were floating in the quiet of deep space, the chaos of Ethelberg Station a bad memory behind them. Ayala sat in her customary chair, her skin a healthy, constant glow. The adrenaline had faded. They were alone. She reached out and took his hand. His touch was a familiar, steady warmth. He braced himself for the return of the suffocating loop, but it didn't come. In the storm of the station's emotions, his love had been something different. It wasn't the cage. It was the all-consuming fire. It was an anchor, a focal point, a lens that allowed her to take in the cacophony of the universe and find the music in it. She understood the fairy tale was incomplete. The death spiral only happened in a vacuum. "I was wrong," she whispered, her voice full of a wonder that eclipsed everything that had come before. She looked at him, her eyes glowing with a love that was no longer a threat, but a revelation. "It's not the prison. It's a key." He looked at her, confused but hopeful.
"A key to what?"
"To everything else,"
she explained, her voice growing stronger, more certain.
"I can't subsist on your love alone. It's too pure, too focused. But it's not a poison. It's the tuning fork. When I'm in your current, it gives me the clarity to hear the rest of the universe. The background static, the ambient feelings, they become a symphony. Our love doesn't starve me by cutting me off. It was starving me because we were trying to live in a quiet room. We were trying to listen to one perfect note when we were built for an orchestra."
He stared at her, the implications of her words dawning on him. A slow, brilliant smile spreading across his face.
"So, our life can't be quiet. It can't be two people sitting in a cabin, peacefully in love."
"No,"
she said, a hint of her dry wit returning.
"Quiet and peaceful would bore you to death, and it would starve me in a month."
She leaned forward, a mischievous light in her eyes.
"Our life has to be one of adventure, of chaos, of strong feelings and high stakes and narrow escapes. It's the only way we can be together."
Rorik let out a booming laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that felt to her like the resonant opening chord of a magnificent composition.
"So what you're saying is, our entire relationship is a dangerous, thrilling, galaxy-spanning adventure."
She gave him a slow, wicked smile, her skin glowing with health and affection and a love that was no longer a paradox, but a path.
"Precisely,"
she purred, moving from her chair to his, settling into his lap.
"It has to be, for both of us."
She leaned in close, her lips brushing his ear.
"So, my love, what adventure are we having for dinner?"
He pulled her into a kiss that tasted of nebula dust and engine grease, and the promise of 1,000 delicious, chaotic tomorrows.